people. With these words, the drafters of the U.S. Constitution established the idea of a self-governed union, one built and ruled by its residents. But when they wrote people, the founders did not actually mean all residents of the United States. They were thinking about people whose class, race, and gender matched their own. But thanks to the people they left out and a few good accomplices, progress has moved us closer to realizing the aspirational sentiment of their words, instead of being limited by their intentions. It is that the ability and desire so many of us have to make America better than intended, to improve upon what those who came before us did, planned, or even imagined, that is what we should recognize as the American dream. We are witnessing a shift right now. A stale version of the American dream is crumbling, breaking apart, and being discarded as the new vision emerges. People are widening and narrowing roles they've been assigned. Many of us are refusing to feel guilty or shameful for not following convention when it comes to success or building family and community. Many of us are moving through the grief that comes from letting go of the picture we had of what our lives would Hold on. We are witnessing a shift right now. A stale version of the American dream is crumbling, breaking apart, and being discarded as the new vision emerges. People are widening the narrow roles they've been assigned. Many of us are refusing to feel guilty or shameful for not following convention when it comes to success in building family and community. Many of us are moving through the grief that comes from letting go of the picture that we had of what our lives would look like, so we can make room for different and maybe an even better picture. More of us are creating new to us and reimagined models. Part of the essence of this shifting is that connection is not about a particular structure. It's about values and love and care. It's about the things that provide what we long for, whatever form that takes. It's about pulling apart the boundaries of what love and friendship look like and who counts as family. It's about finding your people and redefining who your people is. It's in community that we find proof that another world is not just possible, but is emerging all around us.
I was born here in Bartholomew County at CRH. Again, 1983. throwing out, how old am I? Yeah. So I spent the first couple of years of my life on again, off again with my mom and my dad. Like they were themselves on again, off again. For the first couple of years of my life. I know that my first house that I lived in was with my grandparents in Hartsville, which is still the family home. So that's fun. But yeah, so my mother, when she was, 21-ish, decided that she had read so many Louis L'Amour books that she was going to relocate us to northern Arizona, to Kingman, or just outside. Well, I guess we lived in Kingman first. Which is actually prominently talked about in his books. Like he actually talks about Kingman specifically in several of his books. Anyway, so she moves us there with her friend and her two kids, and my mom meets my dad. And I went to live with her. I had stayed with my grandparents until my mom got established out there, and I went to live with her right before I turned 3. And yeah, so I spent probably the next 12 years or so in northern Arizona. But I did spend all of my summers after I started school in Hartsville with my grandmother and my grandfather. So I had flown back and forth from Vegas to Indy and back every summer for all those years until I had graduated the 8th grade. My little brother, Michael, he was very sick when he was young, and that made my grandparents very nervous to have him during the summers. So he didn't come for a while. He didn't start coming as young as I did. So like if I started coming when I was 5, he was probably much probably more like 8 or 9 by that time. So several summers I was here by myself. I was here just with them, and he had stayed in Arizona. But I know they love to travel. They absolutely love to travel. And we went everywhere. I remember so many Indians games. I remember trips to like the Falls of the Ohio, Brown County State Park. I mean, we did so much. I remember one summer my Aunt Sharisa was still a young adult, living in Cincinnati in an apartment, and she had her own Taekwondo studio and on Price Hill in Cincinnati. And I remember specifically because Price Hill Chili was the thing to do while we were there. And of course, I couldn't have been like 7. So how do I remember this? I don't know. But I remember going to stay with her at one point, one of those summers, and doing like a lock-in at her Taekwondo studio. And I remember playing with the rubber knives, like, because when you're doing a martial art, right, you're practicing things, and so they had like wooden guns and rubber knives and that kind of stuff. And I remember we played with confetti, and it was like a really obnoxious, like thin, like very small confetti. And I remember it being like piles everywhere. And I imagine, unless they've ripped the carpet up, that even today people are probably still vacuuming the carpet, vacuuming the confetti out of the carpet in this poor studio. But yeah, so we traveled quite a bit, saw lots of things, and that was definitely different from my home life, which we were not very active. I did not really attend anything remotely like a church living out west. My parents, I'll segue into, my parents actually worked in a casino when I was a kid. And so there was a lot of really interesting experiences that, like, people don't think about the underbelly of a casino, but that was pretty much my daily life as a child. But when I came here in the summers and eventually moved back, my grandmother's very, very active in her local Methodist church. So the Hartsville United Methodist Church, there was a women's group that met every month. And I remember all of those little old ladies in my grandmother's dining room, at least once while I was out there. I would say that my mother's family, aside from my mother, was very much a family of faith, for sure. I'm pretty sure I did vacation Bible school every summer while I was here. I took the religious aspect, the idea of God and heaven and hell, as you would imagine a normal, I guess, mainstream Christian family would be these days. I think I took that for granted. Until I was probably 12 or 13. I remember going to Camp Bonito one summer. First time and only time I had ever done away from house camp. It was a week-long church camp in Brown County. And I remember being incredibly moved by the Spirit and feeling very connected to things. But that very, very quickly waned. I got to a point about the age of 12, maybe 13, where I started exploring more earth revering types of religions. I learned a lot about Wicca in those days, and was very interested in, like, they have a story of creation that I thought was very interesting and sounded a bit more, a bit less fanciful, I would say, than the idea of Adam and Eve. And I wanted to feel more connected to. I think that's probably what hit me about Bonito in the first place, was we spent a lot of time outside listening to nature and being present in the space. And I think that's probably what appealed to me more, which is probably why I went down that path, of wanting to feel more connected to the earth and energies that, were around me. Being a very, I would say, traditional family, my stepfather would never have entertained an idea outside of what he was raised with. And his family was very strictly Lutheran. So Lutheran being half a step away from Catholicism, there's a lot of very strong dogma there. a lot of very strong beliefs, and anything that flowed outside of that would never have been welcomed. So I certainly started that journey by myself. There was a point, I would say, so when I was 14, my stepfather and I did not get along very well, and that's about as far as I'll go with that. We did not get along very well, to the point that I needed to leave that home. And when I was 14, I went to live with my biological father in Martinsville, of all places. My father is not traditionally spiritual. I would say that he's spiritual, absolutely. But I haven't spoken to him in so long that my memories of him and that space are definitely, 25 or 30 years old at this point. But yeah, I would say he was a spiritual person, but never a church kind of person. And so I was free to, do whatever, think whatever. There was no question there. He was not going to judge where I was in that space. That did not last very long. That was a very tumultuous year. I was a freshman in high school, and that time Martinsville High School was on, the IHSAA had put them on athletic suspension. They were not allowed to host home conference sports games because of a racial incident between them and Columbus North. So anybody who's not familiar with the overriding culture of Morgan County and Martinsville in general, that should tell you they've not changed very much in that time. That was me living with my father. Again, that did not last very long. I ended up then going back to live with my mother's parents in Hartsville. And that was the beginning of my sophomore year. So at that time, I had gotten back into that spiritual community that I had grown up with. The little old ladies that we went to church with were the same little old ladies who threw the, the baby shower. They threw the baby shower for my mother when my mother was pregnant with me. So these are women who had literally known me my whole life. And it was absolutely expected. I was absolutely going to church on Sunday. That was something that was expected of me. But that house was a really interesting place because while my grandmother was very into the community and very spiritual, my grandfather was an avowed atheist. So there was always this tension. I wouldn't say tension, not in the sense of like there was no like fighting or disagreements or anything, but there was always at least an internal tension between them, and the fact that my grandfather would speak to me about things and try to get me to question things and think about things more broadly, whereas my grandmother would bring me to community and teach me their beliefs. And it was a really interesting time, I'll say, the division in that house. It was at that time, I think, that they started to understand that I had been really interested in things like Wicca. And my grandfather would buy me books and talk to me about all of that kind of stuff. Him being an atheist was quite willing to entertain whatever spiritual journey I was going to be on. But that was actually a point of contention between me and my family, because my grandmother and my aunt were very Christian, and my aunt was a teacher in the school district that I was going to school in. And I remember specifically from all of those summers, my very best friend in the world, her family had property that had abutted up to my grandmother's property. And so we would climb over the fence from one to the other. And we spent all the time together in the summers. And so she was my very good friend. She was a year ahead of me in school. And I remember at one time, she was so worried about my immortal soul that she had to go to the guidance counselor and tell the guidance counselor that she was so worried. And the principal at the time had walked by her door and overheard this conversation. Knowing that I'm the niece of a teacher in the district, he decided to call up my aunt and tell her, "Hey, I overheard this. Is everything okay at home?" At which point I was brought home and told, "How dare you talk about these things in public? Because if anybody gets the idea that your aunt is not this very devout Christian, it will be very difficult for her to do her job." So I was very squashed in what I was allowed to talk about. It's probably about the same time I was actually kicked out of church. That's a fun story. Yeah. I had been an acolyte, just like anywhere, right? You bring the flame up, you take the flame back. There was a girl that I had been doing the acolyte thing with for months. It was me and her had been doing it for months. And during the service, we would sit in the back because we were, waiting for our turn to come back up. And I remember one day she was telling me something like, she just felt so spiritually unfulfilled in this community, right? She just was not really feeling very connected. And I remember asking her, this isn't the only thing that there is. Have you ever thought about, faiths outside of this faith? Have you ever had those kinds of, thoughts or questions or conversations? She also at that time lived with her grandmother. And I don't remember that conversation going particularly badly. But by the time we made it home, my grandmother had received a call from her grandmother, and her grandmother was very distraught. How dare I speak of things that are contrary to their faith? And I was summarily uninvited to church. That was probably my, sophomore, junior year of high school. I remember being incredibly relieved. I didn't feel like I was being expelled from the community in totality, because I still had all of these little ladies who lived within walking distance of the house. Like, so if there was ever a community thing, I didn't feel like I was being shunned. But I certainly was uninvited to Sunday service. That was definitely a thing. I think that I had already felt that separation. I had already felt separate from from the Christian faith in general, from there was always, I guess, some comfort in the ritual of it, but, one can create ritual and feeling of oneness with the universe without having to be in a specific place with a specific set of people. Coming into a very small school, I had 65 kids in my graduating class, and coming into a very small school as a sophomore, where these kids have known each other their entire lives, I was always on the outside. I had one close friend who I grew apart from my senior year. So I never really felt connected to, the school that I went to or the people that I went to school with. I know I don't have a very continuing relationship with but a couple of people I went to school with, ultimately. The second I was able to, as soon as I got my driver's license and was able to work, I went to work. I worked at Blockbuster in Greensburg for some time. And that was, I guess that became community for me. Right. That was my social thing. I didn't do a whole lot of social in high school. As soon as I turned 18, I was 18 my whole senior year. So I was a legal adult. So my birthday is September 13th and my 18th birthday was 2 days after 9/11. That was a very interesting time. But yeah, so I took another job. The moment I turned 18, I went to work for an auto auction. So I was doing 2 jobs, auto auction, Blockbuster, and I was also participating in band and choir regularly. And so I had, I guess, a full plate at that point. But I had always wanted to be on my own and not beholden to others. I always wanted to be providing for myself and that kind of thing. So I took that on very, very early. Let's go back a bit. So I had an unpleasant growing up. I mean, obviously I have fond memories of things, but my relationships with all of my parents was always very strained. So I would say coming into adulthood after all of that trauma was an incredibly difficult thing. And I remember I had applied to IU and been accepted, but right out of high school found myself pregnant. And so, yeah, college didn't happen. College didn't happen. I remember having a conversation with a cousin of mine, And she was very adamant that I would be ruining my life if I had a child and that I should have an abortion. And she did some calling around to find a clinic that would see me. But there was an expectation at that time that you have an independent ultrasound, which cost a lot of money that I didn't have. And I came to a point where I realized, hey, I'm gonna be a mom. This is how this is gonna go. And that was certainly, definitely a change. If you had asked me up to that point, I would definitely have said, I will never be a mother. I don't do well with children. Children are not going to be a thing for me. But yeah, it happened. Mm-hmm. It happened. So at 19, I had my oldest daughter, Vivian, and I had gone back to live with my grandmother for probably about 6 months when she was first born. And we were on the housing list waiting for an apartment to open up. And I remember in December of that year, so she was born in March, and in December of that year, we moved into our apartment in Columbus at oh my gosh, I can't even remember the name of the complex. But it was actually very awesome. There was a really cool program. So I was in public housing. I was in HUD housing, and we were invited to participate in a program called Family Self-Sufficiency. And that program was awesome in that it allowed you to, first of all, they did, monthly programs where they would teach you things like resume writing. And, I remember they had somebody come in from the health department and give us a whole talk about, STDs and being healthy and that kind of thing. And that was really amazing. But they also had, if you were a member and you lost your income, because HUD housing, the rent that you pay is based on your income. If you lost your income and your rent was reduced to zero because it had to be, once you got employment again, they would protect you for 2 years. So for the first year, you would continue to pay no rent while you got back on your feet. The next year, your rent was half of what it would have been based on your income. And then so that by that third year, you were hopefully back in a financial position that would allow you to pay the rent that you were meant to pay. And by that time, I remember I was actually paying full rent. There was no subsidy on my rent anymore by the time I got out of that 2 years. So I was really very proud of myself. In that time, I had gone to work for Cummins. That was I don't know if it was a stroke of luck, but it was certainly a good thing for me. But yeah, so for that first 5 years, it was just me and Vivi. I can look at the me of that age and say there was a lot of trauma response happening in that time. I certainly wasn't as attentive or patient or generous with my child as I should have been. Or I don't necessarily want to say as I should have been, because then that implies that I'm really harshly judging myself. I know that the mother that I was then is not the mother that I am now. I've worked for Cummins for 20 years. Yeah, man, I'm in my 20th year. That is absolutely amazing. I started off as an hourly employee, making $12 an hour. Actually, that's not true. Let's go back. I started as a contractor, making $12 an hour, not actually as a Cummins employee. And I eventually got hired in November of that year. And I was hourly union for 14 years, 13 or 14 years. It was a long time. For a long time, I was hourly. And I had a manager, I had multiple managers over that time ask me, oh, would you ever consider being exempt? Would you, this, that, and the other? And I was very adamant, no, I will always be hourly. I'm very happy where I am. And eventually I had a manager who convinced me that I was worth it, and that I should pursue an exempt career. And she was absolutely correct. I followed that advice. I ended up working for her for 5 years, and it was a magical 5 years. And I would say I am a lot of who I am today because of the patience and faith that she had in me. Patience with and faith that she had in me. Funny looking back, she is a very devout Catholic. And so it's fun to me how very different we are, and yet how very much she means to me, right? So like I have a deep appreciation for people who are really strong in their faith, especially when they don't let that get in the way of their relationships with others, right? So she was absolutely amazing, and I still have an excellent relationship with her. So I went to work for Cummins in 2006, and in December of 2007, I was bored at work, scrolling through MySpace of all things, and was looking specifically for people in my immediate area because I was bored and young, and so at that time, let's go back a bit. I was a bit of a nerd. I've always been a bit of a nerd, honestly. I had 3 computers in my apartment. So I had a townhouse, and my living room had 3 computers that were networked together. So we could do LAN parties and play like Diablo 2. So I was like the person who did the things. That was a big deal to me. So as I'm scrolling through MySpace looking for somebody, random to hang out with, I see a guy who has more computers than me. So he has more computers than me, and he's listed all the specs of all of these computers. And I'm like, man, this is crazy. So I message him. He works for Cummins. And so we actually talked on our internal messenger at work for about 6 months. So like May comes around, and he's been talking to me about these projects that he's doing outside of work for his brother and this kind of thing. And I was like, do you ever do anything that's not computers outside of work? And he goes, why? Do you want to have dinner? And that was the end of that, honestly. Yeah, we had dinner, and I've never looked back. We were married. That was in May, and we were married in October. Overall, we have a really excellent relationship. He is definitely my best friend. We talk about everything. I don't know. I love him. He's wonderful. After 17 years, his smile still lights me up like it did the first day. So, that's amazing. He's from Texas originally. He wanted to be a police officer. He studied, law enforcement. He has a degree in criminal justice, and actually ended up in Indiana in 2005, I think, with his brother. So his brother's wife came to Indiana for a job, and he was looking to become a police officer and was like, oh, well, they have a state police outpost in Seymour. She's moving to Seymour. Let's all just go. So Patrick moved here with his brother and his wife and their son. So we actually live in very close proximity to my husband's brother and family. But yeah, so he came up here. That didn't work out. And he was just like, fine, I'll do IT. So he's been doing IT for Cummins for 21 years. Bethany was born in July of 2009. So yeah, again, do that math. That was pretty quick after the wedding. She is 16 today, I think. Yeah, she's 16-ish. She's going to be 17 next month. Wow, that's crazy. She's going to be a senior next year. So I have my older daughter is out of the house for the moment. She has a really promising career, and she's a barber, and she's amazing, and I absolutely am so proud of her. But yeah, so she is 6.5 years older than her little sister, and I think that age gap and the very differences in their personalities. Like Vivienne is a lot more like me. We are very neurodivergent people, and we are, I say neurodivergent in the sense of ADHD. And I say that because neurodivergence also covers autism, and Bethany is autistic. And so the differences there, I think, also play at them not being as close as they could have been. But yeah, so yeah, no, Bethany's the younger, and she's awesome. She's in the Key Club. She's working this summer. She is going every Thursday to pass out food at the intermediate school in Seymour. So she's doing volunteer work. She's learning to drive, all the things. I would say probably by the time I was 17-ish myself, I had shed religion, period. Religion and spirituality were not a thing to me. I was absolutely an avowed atheist at that point. So spirituality has never really played into, I would say even to this day, I would say that kind of spirituality is just not something I concern myself with. I know that lots of people have questions about where we come from, where we're headed, why are we here, those kinds of things. I think, to me, those questions don't really do a lot for me, even if I try to answer them. To me, what matters really and truly is how we are with one another, how we're present with one another. And so, questioning a spiritual journey for my children, it was very much a follow your own path. If you get invited to church and you want to go, that's fine. I'm fine with that. But I definitely will provide context for the questions that you have when you have those questions. So yeah, I was never trying to push or guide my children in a particular faith tradition. I do know that when Vivi was incredibly young, she was still in a pumpkin stage, so she couldn't have been 6 months old. We were, I was fresh into Columbus. I had no idea, who was what or where. I don't know how I had heard about this specific community, but I came here and it had to have been late 2003, early 2004. And I came for a service and they were doing a Seder for women, a women's Seder in the evening later that week. And I came back for that and did that. And then somehow or other ended up not coming back for a while. And by a while, I mean 20 years, right? So it was spiritual journey for my kids. I was never in a position where I wanted to push them in a direction or even push them in a direction, like here, you have to find it now. It was never like that. I'm still pretty atheist in that regard. Some years ago, my dad died. In fact, we'll say 2016, my dad died, and my mother immediately married her high school sweetheart, and that relationship did not go very well. So some years later, she was going through a nasty divorce and had come home to live with her mother. Everybody comes home to live with my grandmother. So she had come home to live with her mother, and she was struggling socially and emotionally and maybe spiritually. I don't know, but I felt like it would benefit her greatly to be in the presence of people who were not her family and who I had expected would be much less judgmental of her and her situation than, say, my grandmother's faith community would be. So I said, hey, these people exist. I've been out there. Let's go out there and see what it's all about. I think this will be good for you. So we came out, I guess that was in 2023, maybe. Yeah, man, 20 years. That really was 20 years. Yeah. And I ended up feeling so at home. I don't know that there's any other way to put it. I've always felt so at home here. And so, yeah, and almost immediately, like within just a couple of months, signed the book and have been here ever since, as it were. Before I came back, it's so funny to say that because I only came to like one service 20 years ago. But before I came back, the idea of community was not even a thing in my head. I was, at the time, I think I was comfortable in my own space where I had work and my family, and that was pretty much it. Coming here, I think the first time that the word community actually meant something to me was the realization that if something really horribly tragic were to befall my family, I would just have to say the word and this community would hold space for me. They would come sit with me. They would come make sure that I was fed. They would absolutely cry with me, hold me through the sadness or heartbreak or whatever it was, right? Like to me, it's easy to share joy right? It's so easy to be in company with people who are joyous. The real question is who sits with you when you're not joyous. And I know that this community would absolutely hold me in sadness and loss. And I that is the first time I thought, wow, this is really what that means. I think that the love that I have and the deep sense of trust and belonging that I have in this community means so very much to me that I don't know that I could bear being without it. Now that it's a part of who I am, and I can't imagine, I can't imagine not having this kind of connection with people. And I know that, in the not so distant future, I have an opportunity to build a home on some property that I own, and that may take me physically away from this building and these people. And so the question then became, how then do I foster, how do I, we say the light goes with us into the world. How do I take this light with me into the world and build a community that might not already exist in a space that could very easily need that kind of community? So that has been on my mind quite a bit in the last year or so. So I have been very driven to get into the nitty-gritty of how you build community. What does community mean? What does family even mean? Who do we consider family? What does, how do we learn to be with one another in the truest sense? And I don't even mean that like, not in a romantic sense, but how do we build those close relationships where that if something were to happen, I would be there for you, you would be there for me, and I trust you, right? I trust you with me as I am. When we think of what a spiritual experience feels like in our bodies, we think about what does that feel like. It is that, in my mind, that my heart is so full of joy. I am so overtaken by this fullness inside me that it can do nothing else but spill out into the world. If that is a religious experience, if that is a spiritual experience, I have that on a regular basis. And I feel that when I feel connected to my people. My sincerest hope is that this community grows in a way that allows them to do the good work that they're doing without fear of the future. What I mean by that is doing good work in the world requires means, and it requires bodies. And those two things are always a concern for the people who do the work. And my hope, my sincerest hope, is that there is such an abundance realized in this community that those things cease to be a concern.